Hello there, and welcome to Sleepy Galaxy Channel. Tonight I want to ask you something that has puzzled kitchens and classrooms and living rooms for 20 years, and I want to ask it as a gentle paradox, the kind you don't need to solve, only to hold loosely. Was Pluto ever really a planet? And underneath that question sits an older, warmer one. Does it matter? To a small world turning at the edge of everything, what we humans decide to call it? Here is the thread I want to follow with you tonight, all the way out past the orbit of Neptune and back again. A name is only ever a coat. We sew it, we button it, and sometimes, years later, we unbutton it and sew another. But the body inside the coat, the ice, the mountains, the thin blue haze, that body never once asked for our tailoring, and it never changed because of it. It only ever kept being itself. We have 4 unhurried regions to drift through tonight, and you can let all 4 go, because I will carry them for you. First, we arrive at the little world itself, Pluto exactly as it has always been, unchanged beneath any name anyone ever gave it. Then we look at the coat called planet, how people first stitched that word together, wore it comfortably for decades, and then, in one room in Prague, retailored it while the world outside slept on, unbothered. After that, we drift out into the Kuiper Belt, into Pluto's own hushed family of icy cousins, and rest for a while in the sheer comfort of how much space there is out there, how little any of it is in a hurry. And last, we return to the question in the title, or was it, and settle into the living world beneath the coat, and how patiently, over decades, we came to actually know it. Before we go any further, if this kind of night is useful to you, a like or a subscribe helps the channel find its way to other people who are also lying awake somewhere tonight, looking for something to listen to instead of their own thoughts. It costs you nothing on your end, and on this end it means the channel keeps reaching the people who need it most. There is nothing here to hold on to tonight, no test waiting at the end, no names you need to remember, no facts you are required to keep. Let your shoulders ease down into whatever is underneath you right now. Let your jaw loosen. Let your eyes, if they are still open, grow heavier with every sentence. Because none of this small, distant world is going anywhere. It has already waited 4.5 billion years out there in the dark. And it will wait a little longer while you rest. Settle in. Let's begin. Let yourself keep drifting, out past the last bright lantern points of the planets you already know, out to where the dark between them grows wide and unhurried, and the stars stop crowding so close together. There is no rush to this distance. There is only more room, and then, waiting near the edge of it, one small world that has been holding its place in the dark for longer than anyone on Earth has been watching it. This is where you settle now, beside Pluto. Not looking down at it from some far photograph, but resting near it, the way you might rest near a sleeping friend whose breathing you can just barely hear. Almost 6 billion kilometers separate this small world from the sun, 5.9 billion, if you wanted the exact number, though numbers this large stop meaning much and start feeling instead like distance itself, like the sensation of being pleasantly, safely far from everything. From here, the sun is not the wide gold disk that warms your afternoons. It is a point. Bright, yes, brighter than every star around it, but a point all the same, small enough to cover with a fingertip held at arm's length, casting a light so faint that Pluto's version of daytime looks like your version of a very deep twilight. The kind of hour when a house goes quiet and a hallway light left on somewhere else is the only proof that anything is awake at all. Notice, too, how little this small world seems to need. no wide ocean to keep moving, no thick blanket of air to keep circulating, no crowd of neighbors pressing close on every side, just space and hush and a single faint light doing its patient work from very far away. If you have ever found comfort in an empty room at the end of a long day, some small recognition of that same comfort might be waiting for you here too. Out here, time moves at a different pace too, and this is worth sitting with for a moment, because it changes how you might imagine this whole small world. 1 year on Pluto, one full, unhurried lap around the sun, takes 248 of your years. Whatever was happening on Earth the last time Pluto finished a single circuit, it was long before anyone alive today was born, long before their grandparents were born, long enough back that entire ways of living have come and gone in the time it has taken this one patient body to travel once around its enormous, lazy orbit. It has not yet finished a single full year since it was first noticed from Earth, not even one. And it will not finish that year for a long while yet, long after you. Long after everyone listening tonight, long after the very idea of counting years has changed hands a few more times among whatever comes next. Try to feel that pace rather than calculate it. Feel how a year could stretch out so far that a single trip around a star becomes something closer to geological time than to a calendar, something measured less in seasons than in the lingering rise and fall of entire civilizations back on the small blue world so far behind you now. Pluto does not hurry. It has never needed to. Out here, past the reach of anything that could rush it, going unhurried is simply what a year is, and there is a kind of permission in that, if you're willing to receive it, a reminder that nothing worthwhile actually requires speed. And maybe, drifting here beside it, a memory surfaces on its own. Something you heard once, a headline from not so long ago, back in 2006, when the news said that Pluto was no longer a planet. Perhaps it landed on you at the time as a small loss, a demotion, something taken away from a world that seemed too far off to defend itself. If that memory rises now, let it rise gently, and let it soften as it does, because tonight it isn't going to be told to you as a wound. It's going to be told to you as a question, a quiet, curious question, the kind you can turn over unhurried without needing to reach an answer before your eyes close. What actually happened out here in 2006? What changed? And for whom? Here is the thread to hold as you listen tonight, and you can let it rest loosely in your hand, the way you'd hold a string that leads somewhere pleasant. In 2006, humans changed Pluto's coat. That's really what happened. A room full of people, very far away, on a warm blue world Pluto has never once been close enough to see clearly, sat together and decided on a new word to wrap around this small, icy body, a new label, a new coat, stitched out of definitions and categories and careful reasoning, argued over across long afternoons, refined line by line until it fit the shape someone on Earth had decided a planet ought to have. And the world underneath that coat, this actual place you are resting beside right now, this ball of rock and nitrogen ice turning unhurried in the dark, never changed. Not even slightly. Not even for a moment. It didn't feel the vote happen. It didn't feel the new words settle onto it like a fresh garment. It didn't feel anything at all, in fact, because feeling requires a listener, and Pluto was never listening to Earth in the first place. It was only ever listening to the sun. Faint as that light is out here, and to its own low internal weather. Out here, nothing shifted in its orbit, nothing shifted in its rotation, nothing shifted in the ongoing business of simply being what it has always been. A coat changed, thousands of light minutes away, in a room with chairs and paperwork, and a raised show of hands. The body inside that coat went on turning exactly as before, unaware that anyone on a faraway world had spent an afternoon arguing about what to call it. You can let that thought settle into your chest like something warm and tender. Because it isn't really a story about Pluto losing anything. It's a story about words. About how words are things humans make and remake for their own comfort. The way you might refold a blanket without changing what's underneath it. And if that's true, then whatever Pluto is called tonight, planet or dwarf planet, or simply the small world you happen to be drifting beside, it doesn't actually change what you're about to find when you look closer. The coat is not the thing. It was never the thing. So let the label rest. Let the argument rest. Let the year 2006 fold itself back into the past where it belongs, and turn your attention instead to what's real, to what has been sitting out here this entire time, indifferent to naming, absorbed only in its own slow existence. Because that's the part worth drifting closer for. Not the vote, not the headline, not the debate that unfolded on a warm evening in a conference room thousands of light minutes away, but the actual surface waiting beneath all of it, patient and unbothered, the way it has been patient and unbothered for 4.5 billion years. Let your breathing ease to match the pace of this place. Let the last of that old headline dissolve, the way a worry dissolves once you remember it was never really about you. And let yourself drift nearer now, past the thin edges of Pluto's faint atmosphere, down toward the ground itself, because there is a great deal to see there. Ice that moves like something almost alive. Mountains built from something familiar, wearing a stranger's hardness. A horizon dressed in soft, layered blue at the end of its long day. All of it was there in 2006. All of it is there now. All of it has simply been waiting, the way patient things wait for someone to stop arguing about the coat long enough to notice the world wearing it. So let that be the whole of your task tonight. No arguing, no deciding, only noticing. You don't need to decide anything about Pluto tonight. You don't need to take a side in a room you were never in, over a vote you never cast, about a coat you never sewed. All that's asked of you is to come closer, the way you might lean in towards something you've always wondered about, but never quite had the time to look at properly. Come closer then. Let your shoulders loosen the way they do just before sleep finally arrives. Let the last small tension around that old headline dissolve into the dark around you, and let your attention sink, gradually, past the argument and the vote and the year 2006 altogether, down toward the one thing in this whole story that was never actually in question. The surface itself, ancient and patient and entirely unbothered, waiting the way it has always waited, for you to finally arrive and see, plainly, exactly what it's made of. So let yourself drift closer now, down past the thin edge of that high, dark sky, until the surface itself begins to open beneath you, because this is where the unchanged world actually lives. Not in a word printed on a page in Prague, but in ice and stone and the endless, unhurried work of a place that has never once paused to ask what it should be called. Beneath you, spreading wide and pale and almost luminous against the darker terrain around it, is a shape so distinct that anyone drifting past would know it by heart. Sputnik Planitia. A glacier the size of a small country, its outline traced, if you let your eyes soften and follow it, into something very close to a heart, laid flat across the western hemisphere of this small world, as though it had always been waiting there for someone to notice its shape. It is made of nitrogen ice, frozen so completely that it has taken on the pale sheen of scoured stone, and yet underneath that stillness, something is moving. Divide the glacier's surface into cells, dozens of them, each one wider than a city. Each edged in faint troughs where the ice has folded and sunk, and you are looking at convection, the same unhurried churning you might have watched 1,000 times without noticing it, in a cup of coffee left to cool on a windowsill, cream dropped in and left to bloom into slow, turning shapes before it settles, or in a pot of syrup set over a low flame, its surface breaking into pale, drifting islands that rise, spread, and sink again. Here it happens on a scale that dwarfs continents. Warmth rises from below in wide, soft columns, nitrogen ice near the base grown faintly buoyant with the heat of the world beneath it, drifting upward through the glacier's body over centuries, cooling as it nears the surface, then sinking again at the cell's low edges to begin the whole patient circuit once more. Each cell takes somewhere near 500,000 years to complete a single turn rising, spreading thin across the top, cooling, sinking, and beginning again. A rhythm so unhurried that if you could watch it sped forward like a tide, you would see the whole glacier breathing, a single vast chest rising and settling beneath a blanket of frozen light. Nothing about this needed a name to happen. It was folding and rising and settling in the dark long before any telescope on a small blue planet ever caught its light, and it will keep folding long after tonight, each cell a held breath, in and out, and in again, measured not in seconds, but in centuries. The whole glacier breathing so gradually that a human lifetime would barely register as a flicker against it. One exhale in a conversation that began before the first fish left the first ocean back home. And where the ice does not flow, it stands, because at the glacier's eastern edge, where Sputnik Planitia pale basin gives way to older, darker terrain, the ground lifts itself into mountains, and these are not soft mountains. Tenzing Montes rises kilometers into that thin black sky, cliffs and ridgelines built not from granite or basalt as you might expect on a warmer world, but from water ice. The very same substance that softens into slush under a summer sun back home, that you might have watched drip from an icicle without a second thought. Here, though, water ice is not soft at all. At 230 degrees below zero, ice stops behaving like the fragile, meltable thing it is on Earth and becomes something closer to bedrock, hard enough, strong enough, to hold its shape against its own weight for eons, to be lifted and folded by the deep, slow shifting of Pluto's crust, and simply stay lifted, unbending, the way stone stands rather than the way ice yields. Imagine standing at the foot of one of these peaks, the black sky close and star crowded above the summit, the ground beneath your boots not crunching or softening but ringing, faintly. Like something struck, imagine resting a hand flat against that cliff face and feeling how firm it is, how permanent, cold enough to have forgotten entirely what it means to melt. There is no wind here to wear these peaks down the way wind wears down mountains on a warmer world. No rain to carve them smooth. Only the occasional whisper of nitrogen frost settling on a ledge and staying there, undisturbed, for centuries, so that a ridge carved once by the gradual lifting of the crust might keep almost exactly that same silhouette for longer than any mountain range back home has ever held its shape. These mountains did not rise to prove anything. They rose because deep beneath them, forces older than any vote or any definition pushed the crust upward. The way a hand pushes on a blanket from below, and the ice, faithful to the only laws it has ever known, simply obeyed and kept obeying. Mountain after mountain, ridge after ridge, all the way around the edge of that pale glowing heart. Some of these same ridges may even hold ice from an older layer of the world, ice that has sat unmoved and unmelted since long before the first blueprint of a spacecraft was ever sketched on Earth, patient in a way nothing warm-blooded could easily imagine, holding its shape through a cold so deep and so constant that time itself seems to slow beside it. Above both the churning glacier and the standing mountains lies something thinner still, almost too delicate to be called an atmosphere at all. A haze of nitrogen gas so faint that its entire pressure, gathered across the whole of Pluto, would scarcely register as a breath. And yet this faint envelope has its own quiet performance to give. As sunlight, small, distant, more like the brightest of stars than the warm disk you know, reaches Pluto's edge at what would be dusk, the thin nitrogen scatters that light into layers, dozens of them, stacked delicately above the horizon like the palest sheets of blue silk laid one over another, each layer catching the fading light a little differently than the one below it, so that from far above, the whole rim of the world seems to glow with a low, hazy, tender blue, a blue found almost nowhere else in the solar system, born from gas so thin it should, by every intuition, be invisible. It forms this way every single Pluto day, whether or not anyone is there to see it, whether the world wearing it is called a planet, a dwarf planet, or nothing at all. The haze does not perform for an audience. It performs because sunlight strikes gas, and gas responds. The oldest kind of quiet conversation there is, carried on faithfully across a year that lasts 248 of ours, indifferent to any headline drafted on a warmer world so many hours of light travel away. Some of that nitrogen, warmed ever so faintly by the far-off sun, drifts high enough to escape entirely, trailing off Pluto's sunlit edge in a long invisible tail, only to fall as fresh, pale frost somewhere else on the surface once the world turns further from the light. A slow exchange between ground and sky that has been repeating itself, season after 200-year season, since long before anyone on Earth had a name for either world. Notice, if you can, how none of this, the breathing glacier, the ice-hard mountains, the low blue dusk, required permission from anyone. Sputnik Planitia churned its cells before 2006, and it churns them now, unbothered, each cell working through its half-million-year turn, regardless of the calendar spinning by so much faster on a bluer world. Tenzing Montes stood before that vote in Prague, and it stands, unmoved. Tonight, its ridgelines exactly as tall, exactly as hard, exactly as faithful to their own quiet architecture as they were the year the ballots were counted. The haze layered itself into pale blue silk over 100,000 sunsets before a single human eye ever resolved Pluto into more than a point of light on a photographic plate, and it will keep doing so over 100,000 more, long after tonight's rest has folded itself into your memory. A name, you might begin to feel now, is only ever a coat laid over a world from the outside, chosen by the ones doing the naming, useful to them, argued over by them, stitched and re-stitched in rooms the world itself will never see, while the world underneath simply continues its own unhurried business, ice rising, ice standing, haze glowing, entirely unaware that it was ever being discussed at all. It never once checked to see whether it still qualified, It simply kept doing what it had always done. And Pluto does not do this business alone. Lift your gaze now, slowly, away from the glacier and the mountains and that low blue rim of light, up past the thin haze and into the black overhead. Because circling above this patient, ice-carved world there is company, shapes keeping pace with it in the dark, held close by the same gravity that holds the mountains to the ground, turning through their own patient choreography exactly as they have for longer than any of us have had a word for any of it. And above that haze, above the blue light bending low over the frozen nitrogen sea, there is company. Lift your eyes now, just a little, the way you might lift them from a book to notice someone has been sitting across the room the whole time, patient, familiar, close. Because Pluto is not alone out here at the edge of everything. It has a companion, and the companion is enormous, so enormous that the ordinary rules of moons and planets bend a little just to hold the two of them together. Its name is Charon. Picture it hanging in Pluto's sky the way no moon hangs in yours, not a small coin of light that rises and sets and wanders across the stars, but a fixed presence, roughly half the width of Pluto itself, filling a wide, steady portion of the sky and never moving from its place. Anywhere else, a moon so large relative to its parent world would simply make the parent world tug it around in a wide, ordinary loop, the way your own moon circles the Earth beneath your window. But Charon is too large for that kind of arrangement, too close in mass to Pluto to be swung around like a lamp on a string. Instead, something rarer happens. The two of them share their weight. Somewhere in the dark, quiet space between Pluto and Charon, a few hundred kilometers off Pluto's own surface, there is a point that belongs to neither of them, and it is this point, this small patch of open vacuum, this hinge of nothing, that both worlds circle together, forever unhurried, in a slow embrace that has nothing at its center but balance itself. Let that settle into you for a moment, because it is a rare and lovely kind of gravity to picture. Two bodies, one larger, one smaller, neither one truly orbiting the other, both instead turning gently around a shared point that exists only because they hold each other so evenly. It is not so far from certain kinds of closeness you may already know. Two dancers who lean their weight against one another and find, together, a balance neither could hold alone. Two trees grown so near that their roots have merged below the soil, each one now propping up something of the other in the wind. Out here, ice and rock and thin stone do this too. Pluto and Charon turn, and have been turning for more than 4 billion years, long before there were words for either of them, long before anyone on a small blue world circled a much closer sun and began sorting the sky into categories. And there is more to this dance than the turning itself. Somewhere in that ancient, patient repetition, the spinning of both worlds slowed until it matched their orbit exactly, a soft kind of locking that happens naturally, given enough time, whenever two bodies pull at each other long and gently enough. The result is this. Pluto shows Charon only one face, always, the same familiar hemisphere, the same mountains and plains turned forever toward its partner. And Charon does the very same in return, offering Pluto only one face as well, the same cratered highlands and dark, ruddy cap at its northern pole, never once turning away to show what lies on its far side. If you stood on the near hemisphere of Pluto, out on that nitrogen ice under the pale, distant sun, Charon would never rise and never set. It would simply be there, a fixed companion hanging in a corner of the sky, exactly where it was the night before, and the night before that, and every night for longer than either world can remember. Two friends who arrived at stillness together and simply decided, without discussion, without any negotiation at all, never to turn away from one another again. There is something almost tender in that, if you let yourself feel it rather than only understand it. The idea of two things so bound to each other by nothing but their own quiet mass that they have made a promise of permanence out of pure physics. No vows were spoken. No agreement was reached. It is simply what happens when two worlds lean on each other long enough, patiently enough for the pulling to finish its slow work. You might feel your own breathing settle into something like that rhythm now, in and out, each breath turning around the last, needing no reminder, no effort, just the old momentum of a body that already knows how to rest. Think of how long that kind of locking takes to happen, out where there is no wind, no tide of water, nothing to hurry the process along except the patient, unbroken pull of two masses on one another across empty space. Millions of years of Pluto tugging faintly at Charon, and Charon tugging back, each tug shaving some infinitesimal fraction off the spin of the other, the way a slow current might, over centuries, smooth a stone until it fits the palm of a hand perfectly. There was no rush to it. There was no deadline. The two worlds simply kept circling, kept pulling, kept easing into one another's rhythm across a span of time so long that human history, all of it, every name ever spoken, every word ever sewn onto anything, would fit inside it many, many times over, with room to spare. And at the end of all that unhurried tugging, what remained was this: stillness, achieved not by stopping, but by turning so exactly in time with one another that nothing ever appears to move at all. Even the two faces they show each other carry their own small, private geography, as if each world had chosen what to offer the other. Charon's face toward Pluto holds long canyons, some deeper than anything carved into the floor of an ocean back home, and a dark, reddish cap at its northern pole that scientists believe formed from gases drifting up off Pluto itself, escaping that thin blue atmosphere, crossing the gap between the worlds, and settling slowly onto Charon's ice like a soft dusting of frost, carried on a very long, very patient wind. A gift passed quietly from one companion to the other, gas becoming color, becoming a permanent mark, all of it moving too slowly for anything but time itself to notice. But the two of them are not entirely alone in that wide dark, either, around Pluto and Charon further out, caught in the shared gravity of the pair, the way small leaves catch in the eddy of a slow stream, drift four smaller moons. Their names are soft ones, easy to hold: Styx and Nyx and Kerberos and Hydra. Each is tiny compared to Charon, some no larger than a modest hill, oddly shaped, tumbling end over end as they circle, spinning not in the calm, locked way Charon does, but freely, chaotically, nudged this way and that by the combined pull of the two giants at the center of their small system. They do not glow. They do not announce themselves. If Pluto and Charon are the settled elders of this little household, turning steadily around their shared point, then Styx and Nyx and Kerberos and Hydra are the restless young ones further out, tumbling in their own private rhythms, each one keeping its own time, each one still circling the same quiet center, all the same. 5 moons, one impossibly patient double world at the heart of them, all of it turning in the near total dark, 5.5 hours of starlight away from the sun that lights it, all of it in motion long before any telescope on Earth ever found it, and all of it, every locked face, every slow revolution, every small tumbling moon, completely unconcerned with anything that would one day be decided about it from very far away. Here is the quiet center of it, the thing worth resting on before we drift onward. In 2006, when the news came that Pluto's status would change, nothing here changed at all. Charon did not shift its orbit. It did not turn its hidden face toward Pluto for the first time, curious about what the news might mean. Styx and Nix and Kerberos and Hydra did not pause in their tumbling to take note. The shared point between the two worlds, that small hinge of balance in empty space, did not move a single kilometer, did not so much as tremble. Every relationship out here, the locked embrace of the double planet, the loose tumbling company of the little moons, continued exactly as it always had, exactly as it always would. Indifferent to a vote taking place on a planet none of them could even see with anything but starlight. What changed that year did not happen here, among the ice and the slow orbits and the shared gravity. What changed was a word. A single word, spoken and debated and finally decided upon by voices very far away, on a small warm world circling a far brighter star. Voices that had never once felt the cold of this place, and yet had spent a great deal of care deciding what to call it. So let your mind loosen its hold on this quiet double world for just a little while, and drift instead toward the humans who did the deciding, toward the story of the word itself, the strange and surprisingly old story of how anyone ever came to draw a line at all, and where the very idea of that line first began. Notice, if you can, how little any of that turning cares about names. Charon does not know it is called Charon. The small moons tumbling above it do not know their own names either. Styx, Nix, Kerberos, Hydra are simply sounds that humans far away have chosen to hum to themselves. Whatever changed in 2006 changed only in the small bright rooms on Earth, where people keep their words, their charts, their careful little drawers of language. And it might be worth drifting, for a while, away from the ice and the orbits, into the story of that word itself, planet. Because the word is far older than Pluto, older than telescopes, almost as old as the first person who lay back on warm ground and noticed that a few of the countless lights overhead did not sit still like the others. The word comes from the Greek planets, which simply means wanderer. To the people who first used it, most stars held their places night after night, a fixed and faithful pattern, while a handful of lights refused to behave. They drifted against that backdrop, week by week, tracing their own unhurried paths. Those wanderers earned the name for exactly that reason, not for their size, not for their makeup, not for anything they were made of, but only for the way they moved, and for how that movement looked from one particular, tilted, spinning vantage point. A name born from watching, not from knowing. And it has never really stopped being that. A record of how a world looks to someone far away, rather than a fact about the world itself. For a long stretch of that word's life, the list it named would look strange to you now. The sun itself once wore this coat. So did the moon. Ancient astronomers watching the sky from below counted 7 wanderers crossing the fixed stars: Sun, Moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn. Because from where they stood, that was exactly what those 7 lights were doing, wandering, night after patient night, while everything else held still. It made a kind of sense. It was never wrong, exactly. It was simply a coat cut to fit the knowledge of its moment, stitched from what could be seen with unaided eyes and measured with nothing more than attention. And Earth, meanwhile, was not on that list at all. For most of that early history, nobody thought to call the ground beneath their own feet a planet, because a planet was, by definition, something that wandered across the sky, and the ground beneath your feet does not appear to move at all. It took a slow turning of understanding, centuries of it, to realize that the stillness under your own feet was the illusion, and that this ground, too, circles the sun exactly as those wandering lights do. Once that turning happened, the tailors went back to their sewing. The sun and moon were quietly lifted off the list. They do not orbit the sun the way the others do, one being the sun and the other a satellite of Earth. And Earth itself was quietly added, taking a seat among the wanderers it had spent so long simply watching from below. The list rearranged itself entirely, and nothing about the actual bodies changed even slightly in the process. The sun did not dim, the moon did not shrink, Earth did not shift beneath a single sleeping city. Only the drawer they were filed in moved. There is a smaller, quieter echo of this story, and it belongs to a rock far closer to home than Pluto, a rock you may never have been told to think about at all. In 1801, in the wide gap between Mars and Jupiter, astronomers found a small round body and named it Sirius. For the better part of the next 50 years, Sirius sat comfortably on the list of planets, taught in that era's classrooms exactly as Earth or Mars were taught, drawn on that era's charts among the other wanderers, granted the same solemn coat as any of its neighbors. Nobody doubted it. Nobody argued. It fit, because everything then known about it fit. Then astronomers kept looking at that same gap between Mars and Jupiter and kept finding more small round bodies near Ceres, not one lonely wanderer after all, but the first found member of a whole crowded belt of them, later named the asteroid belt, each one orbiting in that same shared lane, none of them alone out there. And so, without any anger, without any sense of demotion, the coat quietly came off. Ceres was gently refiled as something else, first an asteroid, and much later, once the language had grown a further drawer for exactly this situation, a dwarf planet, while the actual small round body a few hundred kilometers across, warmed faintly by its own leftover heat, unbothered in its lane between Mars and Jupiter, went on turning exactly as it always had. It is turning there tonight, this very hour, completely unaware that it was ever called anything at all. If you listen closely to that story, you may already hear tomorrow's story about a far colder, far more distant little world humming back to you across 70-some years, a rhyme laid down in the sky long before Pluto was even found, waiting patiently for its second verse. Think, too, about how strange the middle of that story would have looked to someone living inside it. Imagine a schoolroom in the 1830s, chalk dust in the light, a teacher pointing to a chart with Ceres drawn confidently among Mars and Jupiter. A whole generation of children learning 8 or 9 or 10 planets by heart, certain that the list they were memorizing was the final one, the true one, the one nature had always intended. They were not careless, and they were not wrong to trust it. They were simply standing at a particular point along a very long river of looking, seeing exactly as much as their instruments allowed, and not one drop more. A better lens was still being ground somewhere. A wider survey of that gap between Mars and Jupiter had not yet been made. The universe was not withholding anything from them on purpose. It was only waiting, patiently, the way it always waits, for someone to look a little longer, a little more carefully, from a slightly better vantage. This is what the coat has always been, if you trace it back far enough. Something sewn by hands on Earth, for the comfort of minds on Earth, so that all of this vastness might be held in a shape a person could carry in memory, could say aloud to a child, could fit onto a single page in a single book. A word is a kind of garment cut to a particular era's understanding, tailored and retailored as that understanding grows, taken in here, let out there, and occasionally handed down entirely to a different body when a better fit is found. The sun wore it once and shed it. The moon wore it once and shed it. Ceres wore it for 50 patient years and shed it too without complaint, without so much as a shiver, because a rock circling quietly in the dark has no opinion about what it is called. It simply continues. Every wearer in this long, slow history has done exactly the same thing, kept turning, kept warming faintly in its own small way, kept doing whatever it was already doing, while overhead, unnoticed and unfelt, the tailoring went on and on. And notice, please, that at no point in any of this did the wearers ever object. No rock has ever petitioned to keep its title. No wandering light has ever dimmed itself in protest at being moved from one drawer to another. The sun goes on burning at the same patient rate, whether or not a chart calls it a planet, a star, or nothing at all. Ceres goes on turning in its lane, its faint inner warmth entirely indifferent to whichever label a passing century has chosen for it. The coat is a human comfort, sewn by human hands, for human minds that would otherwise have to hold the whole trembling immensity of the sky without a single word to rest it on, and the bodies wearing these coats have never once needed them, never once noticed the needle, never once lost a single degree of the warmth or the weight or the slow, faithful motion that was theirs long before anyone thought to name it. So when you let yourself settle into the knowledge of what happened to Pluto, you are really only settling into the newest chapter of a much older habit. Humanity periodically opening its drawer of words and refolding what is inside, not because the sky has changed, but because the people looking up at it have learned something new since the last time they folded. It happened to 7 ancient wanderers who lost 2 of their number and gained a world underfoot. It happened to a small round rock in a crowded gap that spent half a century believing, along with everyone watching it, that it stood alone. And in the year 2006, in a conference hall in Prague, it was Pluto's turn to sit quietly at the far edge of the room, while a group of tired, careful, well-meaning people argued for 2 long weeks over exactly what a planet should be. 3 criteria, drafted and redrafted, a vote taken on the very last afternoon, a single new stitch about to be sewn into the old, patched, endlessly retailored coat that Pluto, 5.9 billion kilometers away, would go on wearing without ever once feeling the needle. Every coat, of course, is stitched somewhere, on some ordinary evening, by ordinary hands, and Pluto's newest coat was stitched in Prague in the summer of 2006, in a room full of tired astronomers who had been arguing for 2 weeks and only wanted to go home. You can picture it, if it helps you rest, not a courtroom, not a trial, just a hall of people who study the sky trying to agree on a word. The way a family might argue gently over what to call a color that sits between blue and green. There were perhaps a few hundred of them left by the final vote, out of many thousands of astronomers in the world, and they raised their hands, and a definition passed, and somewhere past the orbit of Neptune a small icy world kept turning, 5.5 hours of sunlight away, entirely unaware that its name had just been placed on a table and discussed. That is the whole scene. No thunder, no verdict read aloud to a trembling defendant. Only tired scientists, a warm room, a show of hands, and then, afterward, coffee. What they agreed on, in the end, was a kind of checklist, 3 small conditions for a coat marked full planet, and it is worth holding each one loosely in your mind the way you might hold 3 smooth stones, turning them over without hurry. The first, a planet must orbit the Sun. This one, Pluto, has always worn easily, has worn since before there were hands on Earth to name anything at all. One slow lap every 248 years, patient beyond any patience we usually imagine, tracing its long ellipse through the dark, exactly as it always has, exactly as it still does tonight while you rest. The second stone, a planet must be round, pulled into a sphere by its own gravity, heavy enough that its own weight smooths away the sharp edges, the way a river smooths a stone over centuries. Pluto passes this one too, easily, gently. It is a true sphere, gravity's own quiet sculpture, more round in fact than some of the world's still comfortably called planets. 2 stones fit in the palm without any trouble at all. The third stone is the one that changed everything, and even naming it slowly, there is nothing frightening in it, only a technical detail, the kind of small print that exists in every definition of every kind, waiting patiently to matter to someone. The third condition asks that a planet must have cleared its neighborhood, swept the region around its orbit clear of other debris, become gravitationally dominant enough that nothing of comparable size still shares its lane. Think of a lane on a wide, slow road, and think of a traveler large enough, heavy enough, that over billions of years its gravity has tidied the whole lane for itself, tugged smaller wanderers into its own orbit, or flung them elsewhere, or pulled them down as part of itself, until it travels alone. Earth has done this. Jupiter, with its immense weight, has done this so thoroughly that its lane is nearly empty for enormous stretches, and Pluto, small, light, unhurried Pluto, has not done this, has never done this, was never really built to do this, because Pluto shares its long, slow lane with an entire population of kin, the countless icy bodies of the Kuiper Belt, drifting near it, crossing near it, some even brushing close enough that Neptune's gravity had to step in long ago and lock their rhythms together so they would never collide. Pluto meets 2 of the 3 stones. On the third, it shares its road rather than owning it outright, and so the tailors in Prague reached for a different fabric, and the coat they stitched that evening read, simply, Dwarf Planet. It helps, maybe, to say the phrase slowly and let it lose its sting, Dwarf Planet. Not a lesser thing, not a failed thing, not something reduced or diminished in the way that word can sometimes feel when spoken quickly and without care. In the language the astronomers were using, Dwarf Planet was never meant as an insult, only as a category, the way a botanist might speak of a dwarf variety of tree that is simply a different shape of full and complete, never any less alive, never any less itself for being smaller than an oak. Pluto did not shrink that evening in Prague. Not 1 kilometer of it grew smaller, not 1 gram of nitrogen ice sublimated away, because a hand was raised in a warm room on a small blue world nearly 6 billion kilometers distant. The glaciers of Sputnik Planitia kept their same unhurried churn. The water ice mountains kept their same quiet height. Only a label changed, a stitch of thread, a word sewn onto a coat that the wearer would never feel and never know and never, in any sense that matters, care about. And here is a small, comforting thing to carry with you, something the room in Prague did not entirely settle. Even as the vote was counted and the coffee was poured, many scientists, then and now, are not fully at peace with that third stone, the clearing the neighborhood rule. Some point out, gently, reasonably, that if you held Earth itself out at Pluto's great distance, out where the sun is only a bright star and the disk of debris is so much wider and so much less crowded to sweep, Earth too might struggle to clear its lane in any reasonable stretch of time. That the rule depends not only on a planet's own strength, but on the sheer emptiness or crowdedness of the neighborhood it happens to be born into, which feels, to some, less like a law of nature and more like an accident of geography. Others prefer an older, simpler idea, sometimes called the geophysical view, which asks only whether a world is round and shaped by its own gravity, a question Pluto answers without hesitation. So even the tailors, all these years later, still murmur among themselves about the pattern they cut that evening, still hold the fabric up to the light now and then, and wonder if the third stitch was truly necessary, or whether it will one day be picked out and rewoven differently, the way the coat has been rewoven so many times already, for the sun, for the moon, for Ceres, for Earth itself once upon a much older evening. Rest in that disagreement, if you like, the way you might rest in a debate you don't need to resolve tonight. There is something almost tender about it, if you think of it right. Grown scientists, decades into their careers, still gathering at conferences to gently disagree about a word, still trading papers back and forth the way old friends trade letters, none of it urgent, none of it unkind. The coat is still being adjusted, even now, quietly, by careful hands who mean well and who are only ever trying to describe something too vast and too varied to fit any one tidy drawer. Some of those hands would happily fold Pluto back into the family of planets tomorrow, would rewrite the definition to make room for it, and for dozens of its round companions besides. Other hands prefer the tidier list, the shorter roll call, the cleaner classroom chart. Both sets of hands are doing careful work. Neither set of hands has any power at all over the world itself, out there in the cold, going on exactly as it always has. And underneath all of that discussion, underneath every stone and every stitch, is the neighborhood itself, that shared, uncleared lane out past Neptune that Pluto travels instead of owning alone, that wide, slow road scattered with countless icy companions drifting in the dark. It is easy, hearing the word neighborhood, to picture something busy, something close and overlapping, the way a crowded street might feel from a window above it. But this lane is nothing of the kind. It is spacious beyond anything the word crowded could ever mean. Each companion separated from the next by distances too enormous for worry, gaps so wide that a traveler could cross for years and touch nothing at all, could drift for a lifetime and never once come near enough to another body to call it close. All of them glide at their own unhurried pace through a cold so deep and so still it feels less like emptiness and more like a held breath, a shared hush that has settled over that whole quiet stretch of the solar system and never lifted. To share a lane out here is not to be crowded. It is simply to have neighbors far enough away that you could go your whole life without meeting them, and still know, in some slow and settled way, that they are there. What would it be like, you might wonder, to actually feel that lane, not to read about it, not to picture it from a great height as you have been doing, drifting comfortably above it all, but to be carried down into it, out into it, weightless, held the whole way, to leave this high, restful vantage and let something soft and enormous take your weight entirely, the way the dark itself might hold you if you let it. Past the giant planets, past their rings and their wide, slow moons, out across the long hours that sunlight itself needs to travel before it ever reaches Pluto at all. 5.5 hours of light, moving as fast as anything can move, and still that is how far this lane sits from home. You do not have to imagine the effort of that journey, because there is no effort in it, not for you. You do not have to steer, or climb, or reach for anything at all. You only have to let yourself be carried. And that shared, crowded lane Pluto travels, that unswept neighborhood the tailors in Prague once measured and found wanting, is not far now. It is close enough to feel. So let go of the weighing and the wording for a while, and let yourself be carried out to see it for yourself. You do not have to move. That is the first thing to understand about this kind of travel. There is no reaching, no climbing, no push of muscle against distance. Something underneath you simply lifts, the way a hand might slide beneath a sleeping shoulder, and you rise without any sense of rising, weightless, unhooked from every scale you have ever measured yourself by. Whatever held you to your bed a moment ago loosens its grip, and something older and wider takes its place. You are being carried. That is all. You do not steer. You do not paddle. You are simply held, and the holding is enough. There is nothing to check behind you, no map to unfold, no course to correct. Your shoulders, which have carried so much for so long without complaint, have nothing left to carry now. Your hands, which are always finding some small task to hold onto even in rest, have nothing to hold. Let them open. Let them float at your sides the way they might float in warm water, fingers loose, palms turned upward, asking for nothing, offering nothing, simply present. Whatever is carrying you does not need your help, and has never once, in all the long history of this solar system, asked a single traveler to help carry themselves. Imagine drifting outward from the sun the way a leaf drifts from the hand that releases it over a river, not falling, not thrown, just given to the current and trusted to it. The sun falls away behind you, not vanishing, only shrinking, the way a lamp in a house you are leaving grows smaller through the back window until it is only a point of warmth you remember rather than feel. You pass the rust-red curve of Mars without effort, its dust the color of a coal gone cold, and it slides by beneath you like a shape glimpsed through half-closed eyes. Then the room widens. The distances between things stop behaving the way distances behave near home. Here comes Jupiter, enormous and banded, its storms turning so slowly from this height that they look painted rather than alive, ochre and cream and the one long red eye that has been open, turning for longer than any of your ancestors have had names. You do not need to fear its size. Out here, size is simply how a thing wears its patience, and Jupiter's bands drift past you. The unhurried way clouds drift past a window on a day with nowhere to be. Saturn follows, and its rings catch what thin light reaches this far and throw it back in a pale, papery shimmer. Thousands of ribbons of ice so fine that even now, this close, they read as one soft sheet, one long exhale of frozen light circling a planet that lets it. You are not asked to understand how such a thing holds together. You are only asked to watch it go by, held the same way it is held, by the same quiet arithmetic of gravity that never once needs to raise its voice. Uranus tips past on its side, pale and blue-green, a world that seems to have simply lain down long ago and never felt the need to get back up, and something in you recognizes that posture and softens to match it. Neptune comes last of the giants, a deep and steady blue, its winds the fastest in the whole family of planets, and yet, from this vantage, silent, folded into the same slow-motion hush that has settled over everything since you left the inner light behind. 4 worlds, each larger than the one you were born on, each now behind you, each already smaller than your outstretched hand would be against the dark. And still, you are carried. Still, nothing in you has had to work. The current beneath you has not sped up or slowed to mark any of these crossings. It moves at the one unhurried pace it has always moved at, indifferent to how much a traveler might want to arrive sooner, patient with anyone who needs longer. There is a kind of relief in that, once you notice it. Nothing you do out here can make this current move faster, so there is nothing left to try. You can simply be moved. Your breathing, without you asking it to, begins to match that pace. Each inhale a little longer than it was back on the world you left. Each exhale trailing off the way a wave trails off into flat sand and does not bother returning right away. Notice, if you like, without any need to do the arithmetic yourself, that the very light that once warmed your shoulders on a summer afternoon is making this same crossing beside you, and that it is not instant, even for light. Sunlight leaves the sun and needs a little over 8 minutes to reach the world you began this journey on, and needs something closer to 5.5 hours to reach the small, patient world you are traveling toward now. 5.5 hours of light, still traveling, faster than anything else in this whole quiet system, and still it takes that long to arrive. You do not need to hold that number tightly. Let it simply widen the room around you. The way a low light turned down in a hallway makes the house feel larger rather than darker. You are crossing a distance so vast that even brightness needs to rest partway. And yet, you are crossing it without any strain at all, carried the whole way. The way a leaf is carried the whole length of a river, without once needing to know how far the river runs. The dark past Neptune is not empty, though it may feel that way at first. The same soft, deep gray black pressing in from every side, no shoreline, no walls, no floor beneath your drifting weight. But emptiness was never really the truth of it, only the seeming of it, from a distance, the way a field looks bare from a hilltop until you walk close enough to see it thick with grass. You are walking close now, in your own weightless way, and the current that carries you is patient about it, in no rush to show you anything before it is ready to be seen. There is no steering wheel in your hands, and there never was one to reach for. There is only the drift, and the low hush of it, and the strange comfort of discovering that not steering can feel like being safe rather than being lost. If you feel, for a moment, some old habit of worry rising, some small voice asking whether you might drift too far, or lose your way in a dark this wide, let it rise and let it pass, the way a single cloud crosses a night sky and keeps going, never staying to block the same star twice. There is no wrong direction out here, because there is no direction you are choosing at all. The current already knows where it is going. It has made this exact crossing before, carrying light, carrying dust, carrying the slow accumulation of ice that eventually became the very world you are traveling toward. You are only the newest, lightest thing it happens to be carrying tonight. This is the same soft gravity, remember, that holds Pluto itself in its long, slow circuit. The same quiet pull that has kept that small world faithfully tracing its 248-year path around the sun since long before anyone on Earth had thought to name it, let alone rename it. Gravity does not check what a world is called before it decides whether to hold it. It held Pluto through every century it went unseen, through the whole 2006 conversation about coats and categories, through every year since, and it is holding you now in exactly the same unbothered, unasking way. You do not have to earn this. You do not have to arrive anywhere in particular. You only have to let the same current that has always carried that small world carry you a little further into its company. And somewhere in this long, easy drift, without any single moment you could point to as the start of it, the darkness ahead begins to hold something back for you. The faintest interruption in all that even gray. A point of reflected light so small it could be mistaken for nothing at all. Then another beside it, then a scattering more, like the first few grains of frost forming on a window before you have noticed the room has grown cold. These are not stars. Stars burn from within, announcing themselves. These small points only borrow their light, the way Pluto itself only borrows its light, catching what little the distant sun still has to give and returning it, faint and patient, to whatever is watching. You are watching, and you are still being carried, closer now, toward the first scattered glimmers of the vast, quiet ring of worlds waiting out here in the dark. A family, it turns out, far larger than the one small member you set out to visit. And there they are, the first of them, catching what little sunlight makes it this far out and passing it back to you in small, patient glimmers, the way a window across a dark street will hold a single lamp's worth of light and offer it to anyone still awake to notice. You are not arriving at emptiness. You are arriving at a neighborhood. This is the Kuiper Belt, a wide ring of worlds circling far beyond Neptune, and it holds not one or two curiosities, but billions of them, icy leftovers from the very construction of the solar system, the offcuts and unused pieces from when the planets were being built, kept safe out here in the cold ever since. The way a careful hand sets aside the extra fabric from a coat, in case it is ever needed again. Nothing here was ever thrown away. It was only set to drift, wanderer after wanderer, holding its shape in the dark for 4.5 billion years, waiting for someone far off and warm to come looking. You already know one resident of this ring. You have been resting beside it. But Pluto, you now see, was never out here by itself. It was never a lone exception, never an odd guest who wandered into the wrong room and had to be quietly asked to leave. Pluto was the first of this family that anyone found, the one whose glimmer happened to fall across a photographic plate before any of its siblings had been noticed at all, and for most of a century, humans simply did not know it had brothers and sisters. So let the next name arrive without any weight to it, Eris, found in 2005, drifting even farther out than Pluto, small and pale, and, when astronomers finally weighed it with care, very slightly more massive than Pluto itself. This is the discovery that asked the real question. Not should Pluto be a planet, but something quieter and fairer than that, if this new world, so like Pluto in almost every way, was also to be called a planet, then how many more were waiting out here to be found and named the same? The count would not stop at 9. It might not stop at 20 or 50. The tailors in Prague were not trying to take something away from Pluto. They were trying to decide how large a coat could get before the word stopped meaning anything at all. Eris carries its own small companion too, a faint moon called Dysnomia, circling it the way Charon circles Pluto, as though every member of this outer family prefers not to travel entirely alone. For a while, when Eris was first measured, some newspapers on that small blue world called it the 10th planet, and for a season, it almost was. Right up until the same careful weighing that found it heavier than Pluto also found, once the counting was finished, that it belonged to this same great ring rather than standing apart from it. Nothing about Eris minded either name. It kept its long, tilted, 2,500-year orbit exactly as it always had. swinging out to nearly 100 times Earth's distance from the sun and back again, indifferent to headlines, indifferent to Prague, simply continuing to be an enormous frozen world, doing what enormous frozen worlds do. And once you know to look, the family only grows warmer and stranger and more wonderful. There is Haumea, spinning so quickly on its axis, one full day in under 4 hours, that it never had the chance to settle into a sphere at all, and instead stretched itself lengthwise into the shape of a rugby ball, an egg tumbling end over end through the dark, wearing a thin ring of its own, and trailing 2 small moons that catch what light there is like beads on a slow-turning thread. There is Makemake, nearly as bright as Pluto, reddish and frozen, holding its own small moon in a wide, unhurried orbit. There is Quaoar, with a ring so far from its surface that by every rule astronomers thought they understood, it should not have been able to hold together. And yet there it is, circling calmly on, indifferent to the rule. And farthest of all, there is Sedna, on an orbit so vast and so elongated that it takes over 11,000 years just to complete one loop around the sun, spending most of that unimaginable stretch of time so far from any warmth that it barely qualifies as part of this story at all, and then swinging back in, patient beyond any human measure of patience, to touch the edge of the light once more, before receding again into its own private dark. None of them asked to be found. None of them changed one particle of themselves for having been found. Haumea did not begin spinning the day astronomers noticed its strange shape. It had been an egg-shaped world tumbling through the dark for eons before that, unseen and unbothered, simply being exactly what it was. Sedna's slow, immense circuit was already ancient before the first human eye lifted a telescope toward it, and Pluto's heart-shaped glacier had been breathing its long, unhurried tides of nitrogen ice for hundreds of millions of years before 2006. And it went on breathing them the very next morning after the vote in Prague, entirely unaware that a room full of astronomers on a small blue world had spent an afternoon deciding what to call it. This is the low, patient truth folded inside everything you have been carried past tonight. The coat is not the wearer. The label is a kindness humans do for themselves, a way of sorting a universe too vast to hold all at once into drawers small enough to open. It was never a judgment passed down onto the worlds themselves. Eris and Haumea and Makemake and Quaoar and Sedna did not wait anxiously to learn what they would be called before deciding how to behave. They simply continued, as they always had, being enormous and icy and old and entirely themselves. None of this is disorder. From high enough above, this whole ring of wanderers moves with the same unhurried order as everything else you have drifted past tonight. Each one held to its own lane by the same patient gravity. Each one turning at exactly the pace its distance and its mass require. No world crowding another. No orbit rushed or late. It is a family in the truest sense, separate, individual, each shaped by its own long history, and yet bound together by the same unspoken law, circling the same low, faint sun, none of them needing to be told what to do next. So let 2006 settle differently in you now, if it has not already. It was not a demotion, it was an introduction. It was the moment humans, having found one wanderer out past Neptune, and then, slowly, patiently, one careful observation at a time, found 4 or 5 more just like it, finally had enough evidence in hand to say, this is not a single strange exception. This is a family. This is a whole hushed population of small, icy worlds that had been living out here together the entire time, orbiting the same star, catching the same faint light, untouched by human notice for the whole of their long histories, and Pluto simply happened to be the one closest to the door when astronomers first came looking. To call it the first found sibling rather than the outcast is not a comforting trick of language. It is closer to what actually happened. A door opened onto a room that had always been full, and Pluto was standing nearest the light. And what a room it turns out to be. Because these 5 names, Eris, Haumea, Makemake, Quaoar, Sedna, are only the ones close enough, or bright enough, or lucky enough in their timing to have been found and confirmed so far. The Kuiper Belt itself is thought to hold many hundreds of thousands of bodies large enough to be called worlds in their own right, and countless more smaller pieces beyond that, all of them turning in their own unhurried orbits, all of them keeping their own private shapes and colors and stories, most of them never yet touched by a single beam of light sent out from Earth on purpose to find them. Pluto is not the exception in this picture. Pluto is a representative, a small ambassador sent home first, from a family too large and too far and too quiet for any single word, planet or otherwise, to ever really contain. And it is worth pausing here, drifting as you are among the first scattered glimmers of that family, to feel just how much space this all requires. Not the size of any one world, but the size of the room they all share, how far the ring stretches, how much dark and distance sits between one icy sibling and the next, how very much room a family this quiet is given to simply exist in, unhurried and unbothered, each member turning at its own patient pace through a darkness so vast that even light itself, hurrying at its full and tireless speed, takes hours just to cross from one edge of it to the other. And that family, Eris and Haumea and Makemake and Quaoar and Sedna, does not live in a small house. It lives in a house so wide that the word wide barely reaches around it, and it is into that wideness that you drift now, held, weightless, letting the numbers stop being numbers and become something closer to breath. The Kuiper Belt itself, the ring that cradles Pluto and its many icy cousins, begins around 30 times the distance from the Earth to the Sun, and does not finish its curve until nearly 50 times that distance. A shell of ancient leftover worlds so broad that light, which crosses your own bedroom in less time than it takes to blink, needs hours just to cross from one edge of the ring to the other. And beyond even that shell, farther than imagination likes to walk unaided, the Oort cloud waits, a sphere of comets so distant that some of them may take millions of years to complete a single orbit of the Sun, so far out that they mark the true whispered edge of what the Sun's gravity can still call home. And past the Oort cloud, past the last faint comet drifting in the dark, there is nothing at all for 4 more light years, an emptiness so complete that the nearest other star sits on the far side of a silence 4 years wide. A silence that light itself, the fastest thing there is, needs 4 full years to swim across. You are allowed to feel small inside a house like that. In fact, you are invited to. Because smallness, out here, does not mean what it sometimes means in the daylight world, where being small can feel like being overlooked, like being easy to lose. Out here, smallness means something else entirely. It means fitting. It means belonging exactly at the scale a body is built to rest at. Turn the thought over slowly, the way you might turn a stone in your palm until it finds the smooth side. In a house this vast, being small is not the same as being lost. It is being held. Pluto, at 2,377 kilometers across, is smaller than some countries' widest borders, smaller than your own moon. A modest round stone tracing its patient ellipse through a night 3 billion miles longer than any of your own. And nothing about that size has ever troubled it. Pluto has never once needed to be bigger than it is. It does not strain against its orbit or ask the sun for a shorter path or a warmer seat. It simply turns, unhurried, the way it has turned for 4.5 billion years. Held in the same soft, steady pull that keeps every leaf in this slow river moving together. None of them asked to outrun the current. None of them asked to be anything other than what they already are. Consider, for a breath, what it would mean to actually walk that distance the way your body understands walking. If the space between the sun and the earth were the length of one ordinary step, then the near edge of the Kuiper belt would still be 30 of those steps away, and its far edge 50 steps away, an entire ring of worlds pacing out a slow circle around a house whose front door alone takes 50 strides to reach. The Oort cloud would not even fit inside a stroll. It would take a journey measured in years rather than steps. A comet-strewn dark that keeps stretching long after the legs have stopped counting, and Pluto, this whole time, has never once had to walk any of it. It only turns in place inside its own lane, letting the enormous house hold its shape around a body that asks nothing more of the space than the small round room it already occupies, that is worth sitting with. Hugeness does not require effort from the thing being held inside it. The house does the holding. The small world only has to keep being itself and keep turning. Let that be permission, for tonight, for you. You do not have to be the biggest thing in your house either. You do not have to clear your own neighborhood, sweep every corner, prove your lane. You can be one small, round, quietly complete thing drifting through a night that is far larger than you, and let that largeness be a kind of shelter rather than a kind of warning. Think of how the Kuiper belt does not crowd its members, how Pluto and Eris and Haumea and all the rest each keep their own wide berth, their own unhurried lap, none of them touching, none of them competing, simply coexisting in a ring so roomy that billions of worlds can turn there without ever once bumping shoulders. There is room, in other words, for smallness to simply be smallness, without apology, without a task attached. Your own breathing can be like that now if it wants to. Small, round, unhurried, one lap and then another, needing nothing from the size of the room around it, only using the room as a place soft enough to keep happening in. And maybe this is the real shape of the number 4 light years. Once you stop trying to hold it as a fact and let it become a feeling instead. It does not mean isolation. Held loosely, the way you might hold a blanket rather than a fact, it means privacy. It means that this whole outer reach of the solar system, Pluto and Charon and the little tumbling moons, the heart-shaped glacier, the mountains hard as stone from cold rather than heat, the ring of siblings, the slow comets past even that, all of it, belongs to a house closed quietly off from the rest of the galaxy by a silence 4 years wide on every side. Nothing crowds in, nothing has to be defended. It is simply far, in the gentlest sense of far, far enough to be undisturbed, far enough that the sun itself becomes just one star among many rather than a weight pressing down. Far enough that a small world can spend 248 years completing a single lazy circuit, and no one out there minds the pace. You, too, tonight, are allowed that same undisturbed distance from the parts of your day that pressed and demanded and needed answering. Let this room be that room. Let this dark be 4 light years of dark, closed softly around you, with nothing on the other side of it asking anything of you at all. Notice, too, how none of this scale ever depended on a name. Long before Prague, long before anyone on that small blue world 4 light years inside this silence had even built a telescope strong enough to notice, the belt was already this wide, the Oort cloud already this far, Pluto already tracing this same unhurried ellipse through it, already exactly this size, exactly this held. The coat changes. The house does not. Eris does not become more massive or less by being called a dwarf planet. The belt does not shrink because a vote in a conference hall decided how to file one of its members. Every measurement you have just carried through your body, the 30 to 50 Earth-Sun distances of the belt, the light years of Oort cloud hush, the 4 more light years of open dark beyond even that, was already true 100 years ago, 1,000 years ago, before Tombaw's plates, before Lowell's calculations, before any human eye had turned this far outward at all. The house was built and furnished long before anyone arrived to draw a floor plan of it, and it will stay exactly this size long after every floor plan anyone ever draws has been redrawn again. That is, perhaps, the quiet comfort underneath the comfort. Not only that you are small and held, but that you are small and held inside something that was never waiting on anyone's opinion to become real. So let yourself rest here a moment longer, inside a house 4 light years wider than its nearest neighbor, cradling a ring of small worlds that never asked to be counted or crowned, cradling one small world in particular that has simply gone on being exactly itself, unchanged, unbothered, since long before it had a name at all. The distance is not a wall. It is a blanket. The size is not a warning. It is a room built generously enough that nothing inside it ever has to hurry. And somewhere inside that generous, unhurried room, still turning, still held, still tracing the same slow arc it has always traced, is the small world this whole night keeps circling back to. The one whose coat has been sewn and re-sewn by hands 4 light years away, whose name has been raised and lowered and argued over in rooms it never heard, and whose true self, underneath every coat anyone has ever offered it, is the only question that has ever really mattered here. So let the vastness settle. Let your own breathing settle inside it, and let the mind turn, gently and without any urgency at all, back toward the close and familiar shape of that question, beneath all the coats, beneath every word humans have ever draped over it. What is Pluto, really? And here, held and small and unhurried, you can finally ask the question the whole night has been carrying you toward. Beneath all the coats, wanderer, 9th planet, dwarf planet, whatever label a room full of astronomers agreed on over breakfast in Prague, what is Pluto, really? Not what is it called. What is it doing right now, in the dark, while nobody on Earth is watching? The answer turns out to be simpler than any argument about words. Pluto is busy. It has always been busy. Long before 2006, long before anyone on a small blue world 4.5 light hours away had even found it with a telescope, Pluto was already doing the work that some scientists say is the real test of a planet, not what it orbits, not what it shares its lane with, but whether a world is alive on the inside, moving itself, remaking its own face out of its own warmth. By that older, deeper definition, the geophysical one, the one that asks about a world's inner weather rather than its outer neighbors, Pluto is not a leftover. It is not a demoted afterthought parked at the edge of the family photo. It behaves in nearly every way that matters to a geologist, exactly like a planet. Think of what that means. Out here, at 40 times Earth's distance from the sun, where sunlight arrives so faint it is barely brighter than a full moon back home. A world this cold, this far, this small, should by all rights be finished, a dead ball of ice, frozen solid to its core, its surface a museum of craters accumulated patiently over 4.5 billion years and never touched again. That is what everyone expected before New Horizons arrived and looked closely for the first time. Instead, they found a face nearly free of craters across huge stretches of terrain, which only means one thing in the slow language geologists read. Something has been resurfacing it. Something has been erasing the old scars and laying down new ground. Recently, geologically speaking, perhaps even now, while you rest here in the dark beside it. That something is Sputnik Planitia, the great heart you already know, the basin of nitrogen ice you watched breathing in slow convection cells not long ago in this same night. It is not simply sitting there. It is a glacier in the truest sense, flowing, folding, turning over on itself the way any glacier on Earth does, except that here the ice is nitrogen instead of water, soft enough at minus 230 degrees to behave almost like a very slow, very cold syrup, rising in warm cells from below and sinking again at its cooling edges. A cycle that takes only about 1 million years to complete a single turn, which on the clock of a solar system is barely more than a held breath. A world that has stopped moving inside does not do this. Only a world with heat left in its belly, heat left over from its birth, and heat still being made quietly by the slow decay of radioactive elements buried in its rocky core, can keep an ice sheet stirring like that, patiently, for billions of years running. Walk your attention, for a moment, along the polygon-shaped cells that pattern the whole surface of that basin, each one 100 kilometers or more from edge to edge, each one bounded by narrow troughs where the rising ice has cooled and sunk again at its margins. Every one of those cells is a small, ongoing act of renewal, no different in principle from a pot left to simmer on a low flame, warmth rising at the center, spreading, cooling at the rim, sinking, rising again, an unbroken circuit that has likely been running since long before there were eyes anywhere to see it, and will likely keep running long after this particular night of listening has ended. It does not pause to ask whether it is permitted to be called planetary. It only turns the way it was always going to turn, drawing fresh ice up from the deep reservoir below to smooth over whatever scars drift down onto it from space. And the evidence for that inner heat doesn't stop at the surface. Scattered across Pluto's face, especially near its southern reaches, there are broad, rounded rises unlike anything else nearby. Mountains with dimples at their summits, gently domed, oddly bulged, unlike the sharp water ice peaks of the Tenzing Montes you visited earlier. One of the largest of these has been given a name of its own, Reitmans. It rises several kilometers above the surrounding plain and spans roughly the width of a large city, and at its heart sits a broad central depression, the kind that, on Earth, usually means only one thing: a vent, a place where material once rose from somewhere deep and spread outward across the surface, again and again, building a mountain not through impact but through eruption. Not fire, out here, nothing so fierce as that. If Reitmans is what its shape suggests, it is a cryovolcano, a volcano built not from molten rock but from slush, from water ice softened just enough by inner warmth to rise, ooze, and settle. then freeze again into new ground. Nobody has caught it erupting. Nobody needs to. The shape alone is a kind of quiet confession this world has at some point breathed outward from within. And beneath it all, deeper than any glacier or any mountain, there is something even more startling to hold gently in your mind tonight: the strong likelihood of an ocean. Not a memory of one, not a dry fossil of ancient water, but liquid water, right now, sloshing in the slowest imaginable tides beneath the frozen crust, most probably cradled directly under Sputnik Planitia itself. The clues are indirect, but patient and consistent. The way that Great Basin has stayed positioned facing almost exactly toward or away from Charon over immense stretches of time. The way its extra mass behaves as though something denser than ice is sitting beneath it, waiting, a layer of liquid water, kept from freezing solid by salts dissolved within it, and by that same faint internal heat rising from the rock below, insulated from the killing cold above by dozens of kilometers of ice acting like a thick, unhurried blanket. An ocean. On Pluto. Hidden, dark, ancient, entirely its own, needing no one's permission, no vote, no name, to exist. Picture it, if it helps you settle further into the mattress beneath you now, a dark, unlit sea, wider than any ocean on the small blue world you came from, resting under a roof of ice thick enough to swallow the tallest mountain range on Earth twice over. Its water pushed just above freezing by nothing more than the leftover warmth of a world's own birth. No waves reach that ceiling of ice. No storm ever stirs its surface. Because there is no surface, only pressure and dark, and a temperature held, degree by careful degree, in perfect balance between freezing and not. It has almost certainly been there far longer than anyone has been calling this place anything at all, and it will almost certainly still be there, unhurried and unwitnessed, long after tonight's word, for it has been replaced by some future word nobody here can yet imagine. So this is what was happening the whole time, underneath the argument. While astronomers in a conference hall debated 3 careful criteria, orbiting the sun, rounding itself under its own gravity, sweeping its lane clear of neighbors, Pluto's ice was still rising and folding in its enormous heart-shaped basin, while the word planet was being lifted off, and a new coat of dwarf planet was being sewn on and buttoned into place. A mountain built from ancient eruptions was still standing exactly where it always had, its summit still hollowed by whatever last rose through it. While newspapers on the small blue world far behind you ran their gentle headlines and settled, over months, into a new habit of speech, an ocean kept its own steady dark, kept its own slow warmth, entirely unconcerned with what anyone was calling the ice above it. And this is where the paradox, the one this whole night has been quietly circling, finally rests, rather than resolves into any sharp answer, because it doesn't need a sharp answer at all. Is Pluto a planet? By the astronomers' careful accounting of orbits and cleared neighborhoods, no, not anymore. Not since Prague. Is Pluto a planet? By the geologists' older, simpler test of what a world does with its own inner heat, yes, as fully and unmistakably as almost anywhere else in this solar system that carries the name. Both of these are true answers, at the very same time. And there is nothing uncomfortable in that, once you stop expecting one word to hold everything a world is. They are simply answers to different questions. One asks what Pluto is wearing. The other asks what Pluto is doing. And the second question was never in any doubt, never once interrupted, not for a single slow turn of that ice heart. not for the whole long argument on Earth about what to call it. The coat changed. The wearer, warm at its center, patient in its orbit, kept doing exactly what it had always done, which perhaps leaves only the gentlest question of the night still unanswered, not what Pluto is, but how anyone so far away, on a world so small and so blue, ever came to know any of this at all. How a heart of nitrogen ice, a hidden ocean, a mountain built from ancient eruptions, came to be seen, truly seen, in close and careful detail, by creatures who for most of their history could only look up and wonder whether that faint smudge of light was even there. And that question, how anyone so far away, on a small blue world lit by a much nearer star, ever came to know the shape of a heart carved in nitrogen ice, so many hours of sunlight distant, carries its own kind of comfort, because the answer is not a single flash of discovery. It is a long chain of patient people, each one handing the search to the next, like a lantern passed hand to hand down a dark hallway, none of them in a hurry, none of them needing to finish it themselves. It begins with a man named Percival Lowell, in an observatory he built on a hill in Arizona, watching for a world he never lived to see. He believed something unseen was tugging at the orbits of Uranus and Neptune, some planet X out past the reach of ordinary telescopes, and he spent the last years of his life doing arithmetic and looking, night after night, at a sky that gave nothing back. He drew up long tables of numbers, predicting where such a world ought to be, refining his guess again and again, the way you might turn over a single thought many times before finally letting it rest. He died in 1916 without an answer. The search did not die with him. It simply waited. The way Pluto itself was already waiting out there, unnamed, unbothered, circling the sun once every 248 years, whether anyone on Earth was looking or not. 14 years later, the lantern reached a young man named Clyde Tombaugh, 23 years old, who had never finished college and had built his own telescopes out of parts from a cream separator on his family's farm before Lowell Observatory ever hired him. His job was almost unbearably careful work. He photographed the same patch of sky on different nights, then set the two glass plates into a machine called a blink comparator, which flickered rapidly between them so that anything that had moved, anything not fixed like the distant stars, would seem to jump back and forth against the stillness. Everything else in the frame held its place. Thousands of stars, held perfectly steady, night after night, plate after plate. He sat in a dark room for months doing this, one small square of sky at a time, and found nothing, and went back and looked again. It is worth resting for a moment on how unhurried that labor was. No computer to sort the pixels, no algorithm to flag the anomaly, only a young man's eyes, blinking between two photographs, trusting that if a world was really there, it would eventually give itself away by moving. On the 18th of February, 1930, it did. A single point of light, no brighter than a 14th magnitude star, shifted its position between two plates taken 6 days apart. Tombaugh checked it against a third plate to be sure his eyes weren't inventing what he hoped to find. They weren't. A new world, 39 times farther from the sun than Earth is, had let itself be seen, not because it had changed anything about itself, but because a patient man had finally looked in the right direction, at the right hour, for long enough. It is easy, lying here, to picture that room. The low hum of the machine, the small click as one plate swapped for the other. A young man's breath slowing as one point among thousands finally, faintly, moved, the observatory did not rush to name it. They waited weeks, gathering suggestions from around the world, the way you might let a name arrive rather than force one. And the name that was chosen came, in the end, from a child. Venetia Burney was 11 years old, living in Oxford, and over breakfast one morning, her grandfather read her the news of a distant, cold, dark new world found at the edge of everything. She thought of the Roman god of the underworld, who could make himself invisible, who ruled a realm the sun's light barely reached, and she said, simply, that they should call it Pluto. Her grandfather passed the suggestion along to an astronomer friend who telegraphed it to the observatory in Arizona, and the name crossed an ocean and a continent inside a single day, carried by nothing more than a girl's quiet idea over toast and tea. It is a small, tender detail to hold on to here at the edge of sleep, that the coat this world has worn the longest. The very name, Pluto, came not from a committee or a formula, but from a child's unhurried breakfast thought, offered gently and never taken back. For nearly half a century after that, Pluto kept its secrets close. It was a single point of light, even in large telescopes, too far, too small, too dim to show any detail at all. Decade after decade, astronomers had almost nothing new to add to what Tombaugh had already found, and the world seemed content to let the matter rest there for a while. Then, in 1978, an astronomer named James Christie was studying photographic images of Pluto, trying to pin down its position more precisely, when he noticed something odd, a faint bump on one side of the tiny blurred image, appearing and disappearing as if the point of light itself were slightly elongated, slightly lopsided, on some nights and not on others. It took real patience to trust that bump, instead of dismissing it as a flaw in the photograph, a smudge on the glass, a trick of the eye after too many long nights at the eyepiece. But he checked the timing of when it appeared, and when it vanished, and the pattern repeated with a rhythm of about 6.5 days, and that rhythm became Charon, the great companion moon, hiding for 48 years inside the smudge of Pluto's own light before someone finally noticed it standing just barely apart. Two worlds, dancing so closely together around their shared point in space that from Earth they had simply blurred into one, keeping their secret in plain sight the entire time. And then the lantern passed to a spacecraft. In January of 2006, the very same year the coat of dwarf planet was being stitched in Prague, a small piano-sized probe called New Horizons lifted off from Florida, carrying instruments, a plaque, and, tucked inside, a small container of Clyde Tombaugh's ashes, so that the man who first found Pluto with his own patient eyes would ride along to see it properly, 76 years later. At last, the spacecraft did not hurry either. It could not. It took 9.5 years to cross the distance, gliding out past Jupiter for a gravitational nudge, then simply coasting, alone, through the long dark, while on Earth entire careers rose and rested, and new instruments were built, and Pluto quietly kept spinning, keeping its promise of one slow year every 248, indifferent to the calendar of its visitor. In July of 2015, New Horizons finally arrived, sweeping past Pluto and Charon in a single brief flyby lasting only hours, faster than the eye could rest on any one feature, gathering as much data as it possibly could in that narrow, unrepeatable window, because there would be no second pass, no turning around. And there, in the first clear images, was the heart, Sputnik Planitia, pale and vast and unmistakable, exactly the shape a small world might choose if it wanted, after 85 years of being only a smudge of light, to finally say hello. But even then, the reveal did not come all at once. The spacecraft was so far away, so faint a whisper across so many billions of kilometers, that it could only send its pictures home slowly, in a thin trickle of radio signal, across 15 more unhurried months, one image, one measurement, arriving a little at a time, the way a story might be told to someone already drifting toward sleep. A few words now, a pause, a few words more. Never rushed, never all at once. Scientists on Earth spent over a year simply waiting for the rest of the postcard to arrive, each new fragment adding one more soft brushstroke to a portrait that had been forming, unseen, for 4.5 billion years before anyone thought to ask what Pluto really was. Lowell, who never saw it. Tombaugh, who found it by blinking patiently between two photographs. A child who named it over breakfast, half asleep at the table. An astronomer who noticed a bump that turned out to be a whole second world. A spacecraft that carried a man's ashes 9.5 years just to say a proper hello, then took 15 more months to finish telling what it saw, one faint signal at a time. Each step arriving softer than the last, spaced further apart, the search itself slowing the way a body slows on its way down into rest. And underneath every one of those steps, the entire time, across a full century of watching, Pluto simply continued, unhurried, unbothered, wearing whatever name or coat was given to it that century, being exactly what it had always been, long before anyone thought to look, and long after the last picture finally arrived home. Tonight has been about arrival, about a small round world at the edge of the solar system that has never once needed our permission to be exactly what it is. Mountains of water ice under a nitrogen sky. A heart-shaped plain of frozen ocean, spinning its slow 5-day day the same way it has for longer than there have been eyes anywhere to watch it. Tonight has been about the coat, about how planet was never a fact carved into the universe, but a word we made, wore comfortably for most of a century, and eventually altered, one August afternoon in Prague, by a show of hands in a room that Pluto never heard about and never needed to. Tonight has been about the family, about the Kuiper Belt's whole hushed crowd of icy siblings, Eris and Makemake, and Haumea, and thousands more too small and far away to be named at all, every one of them turning together out there in that dim, unhurried region where nothing has to rush and nothing ever has. Tonight has been about the question itself, or was it, about the living world underneath the coat, the one a small spacecraft finally showed us up close in 2015, nitrogen glaciers that flow, mountains that may still be rising, a possible ocean resting under all that ice, a place far stranger and far more alive seeming than any single label could ever hold. None of this needs anything from you tonight. You don't need to remember which year the vote happened, or how many moons circle that small world, or what an ocean under ice might mean. You can let every fact you heard tonight dissolve the way sugar dissolves into warm water. It doesn't disappear. It just stops needing to be held in any particular shape. If you're still listening, another peaceful exploration is already waiting on the screen in front of you, and you don't have to do anything about it at all. Just let it begin on its own, the same way tonight began, without you ever needing to reach for anything. Here's a thought to let go of rather than answer, something to loosen into instead of solve. If a whole world can keep being exactly, fully, entirely itself, no matter what name we hang on it, what is it in you that has stayed the same beneath every name anyone has ever called you? You don't have to answer that. Just let it sit somewhere behind your closing eyes, the way Pluto sits out there behind everything else, patient and unhurried, 3 billion miles from anyone's opinion of it. Feel the weight of your body settling a little further into whatever is holding you up right now. Feel your breath finding its own low rhythm, in and out, needing no direction from you at all. Whatever coat the day put on you, a name, a job, a worry, a task left undone, you can let it hang loose on the chair beside the bed tonight. The body underneath it, the one breathing right now, is the only part that was ever really you, and it already knows exactly how to rest. Let the dark around you feel less like an ending and more like the space between the Kuiper Belt's slow wanderers, wide, dim, and entirely safe to drift through. There's nowhere you need to be. There's nothing left to carry. Just the next breath, and the one after that, drifting further and further from thought, the way a small icy world drifts further and further from the sun, in no hurry at all, needing nothing, held by nothing but its own low, patient orbit. Sleep well.